Okay, let us begin. So, during the time of Rav Hirsch writes this in his Sefer. He says that 15 years earlier, we're talking about the 1850s, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch writes that 15 years prior, there was someone who got up in front of the community and said, there's no reason to keep Tisha B'av anymore. Life is good. Life in Germany is good. Come show up on Tisha B'av in your Shabbat clothes. And Rav Hirsch laments the fact that an individual got up in the community and said these things. It's not our topic today, but we definitely know that we need Tisha B'av. Unfortunately, Tisha B'av is alive and well. And that person himself never lived to see what happened in Germany 100 years later after he said these things. But that would be the place of perhaps the greatest Tisha B'av in Jewish history and human history. We have to focus ourselves. What's our attention? What do we need to be focusing on now? We know that after Chatzot, the mood of Tisha B'av changes, and halachically we see that the first part of the day we do not sit on chairs, we sit on the ground saying keynote, and after Chatzot we already sit up in chairs as we're doing right now, and the mood is very different. How do we understand this difference and its source in what Tisha B'av is all about? We also know that at Shachrit we don't put on tafel and tefillin, and at Mincha we do. How do we understand this difference between Shachrit and Mincha? Those are the main questions that we want to address and really want to get an idea of the energy that we're meant to be feeling now, which is a very powerful energy. I hope that in some small way I'll be able to communicate it to you, but it's perhaps the most powerful energy of the entire year. And it's coming from a deep understanding of what Tisha B'av is all about. And let us begin in source number 1 let us begin to, someone's trying to get in. Anyway, let us begin to try to understand the essence of Tisha B'av and what the Avelut is all about. And we'll see that there are really 2 parts to the Avelut. In source number 1, the Netivot Shalom, the Rebbe of Slonim says, Al derech avodah yesh lomar d'hine inyan avelut u'chorban she'Yisrael mitablim u'bochim u'mekonenim tamid al galut hashchina. This is something we do constantly, yearning for the galut hashchina. Some explain that v'techazen enenu b'shuvcha l'tzion b'rachamim brachata Hashem ha'machzir shchinato l'tzion is perhaps the most important bracha that we say in all of Shmona Esrei out of the 19 brachot. And we express that in different ways. V'yushalayim yirchav rachamim tashuv. Etzemuch David avdecha merat tatzmiach. V'techazen enenu b'shuvcha l'tzion b'rachamim. These are all different expressions of the same thing, galut hashchina. Habir b'zeh mishum shekol התרקמות הבניין המחודש של בית המקדש והגבולה של גלות השכינה הוא על ידי האבלות והתפילות של ישראל. The way we're going to be able to fill the void of the lack of the Beit HaMikdash and the lack of the Shekhinah residing amongst us is through our tefillot, through our avelut. Hem amsher mamshechim of binyan Beit HaMikdash, we're the ones, we're the tzinor that bring it down. V'hine be'avelut yesh beit chalakim. In Avelut of Tisha B'av, there are 2 parts. Yesh Avelut al ma shaya ve'inenu od. There's Avelus on what was and isn't now. She'alanu Beit HaMikdash b'tifarto. We had the Beit HaMikdash in its splendor and its glory. Im Gilui Ashchina v'ne'evad mitanu, and we lost it. V'im b'chol inyan tzarich Yehudi lashlim ratzon Hashem. Im Chorban Beit HaMikdash asur lashlim. Says the Rebbe that if we have to accept every part of our life and everything that happens about the Beit HaMikdash, we don't accept. And we can't be mashlim, we can't be shalem with the fact that we don't have a Beit HaMikdash. So the first part is all the mourning, the sadness, the tragedy of the fact that we don't have a Beit HaMikdash and the Shekhinah is not with us. But the second part is tzipiyah le'atid. The second part of Avelut is a yearning for the future. Hishtokikut v'galguim lebinyan Beit HaMikdash atid. A yearning for the Beit Shlishi that's going to be rebuilt one day. Ukshemamar Chazal shebesha shemachnisim adam ledin sholim oto tzipita liyeshua. When we come in and get judged after our big 120 years, we get asked, tzipita liyeshua, did you have a yearning for the Yeshua? Even if we have emunah, but did we have a yearning? Did we want it? This tzipiyah, this yearning, is what brings it down. So these are the two parts of the Avelut. There's the sadness, the pain, the tragedy, crying on the ground. And then there's part two, the yearning for the Geula, Tzipita Liyeshua. And what the Rebbe says here very simply is based on Eicha. If we open up our Tanakh and we see, it's true, a majority of the psukim are about destruction and mourning and sadness and how we've destroyed ourselves, how we've corrupted ourselves. If you open up to Perek Gimel in Megillat Eicha, Perek Gimel Pasuk Yutet, Zechor ani murudi la'ana. Remember the afflictions and the bitterness, the wormwood, la'ana v'rosh, and the bitterness. Zechor tiskor b'tashoach alei nafshi. Remember the despondency. Zot ashiv el libi al kenochil. However, this I bring into my heart. Therefore, I still hope. Chazdei Hashem ki lo tamnu. The chesed of Hashem ki lo tamnu doesn't end. Ki lo chal rachamav. Hashem's mercy doesn't stop. Chodashim lebikarim rabba emunatecha. Great is your emunah. There's hope for tomorrow. Chelki Hashem, Hashem, you are my part. Amra nafshi al kenochilo. Therefore, I still hoped him. Tov Hashem lekovav. Hashem is good for those that hope for you. Lenefesh tidrashenu. For those that seek you. And it says further on, nechbesad darchenu v'nachkora. We'll search our ways, and we'll do investigation and Neshuva ad Hashem, and we'll return to Hashem. Friends, what I'm sharing with you is that there's a duality. There's two parts. There's part number one, which is the sadness and the mourning and the pain and the tragedy, the despondency, the suffering. And part number two is the hope for the future. And that comes across very sharply here in Perek Gimel. Right in the center of Megillat Eicha. And if we didn't understand until now, it is a little bit strange, it is a little bit out of character, but it's exactly reflecting these two elements of what Tisha B'av is all about. And this is the way the Megillah ends. It kind of goes back and forth. In Perek Hey, the last chapter of Eicha, Pasuk Yud Chet, Pasuk Zayin, Al Zeh Hayad Daveh Libeinu Al Ele Chashchu Eineinu. This is what is mourning in our hearts. Al Ele Chashchu Eineinu. About these, our eyes have darkened. Al Har Tzion Sheshomen, that Yerushalayim is dark and desolate. Shoalim Ilchu Bo. Wolves, foxes are going through it. Ata Hashem L'olam Teshev, Hashem, forever and ever you sit there. Kisecha L'dor Vador. Your throne is for all generations. Lama L'netzach Tishkachenu Tazvenu L'orach Yamim. Why forever are you going to forget about us? Leave us for the length of days. Meaning reflecting the bitterness, the pain. However, Hashivenu Hashem Elecha v'nashuva chadesh yamenu kikedem. Hashem, bring us back to you, and we'll return. Renew our days like old. Ki mos mastanu. Even if we've made ourselves disgusting, katzavta aleinu ad me'od. Your anger has poured out on us a lot. And we finish, Hashivenu Hashem Elecha v'nashuva chadesh yamenu kikedem. Once again, we see this back and forth of the sadness, the negativity, the destruction, and the hope for the future on the other side. And of course, even though in Eicha, it finishes with a very negative pasuk, but we go out of our way to finish with a positive pasuk, Hashivenu Hashem Elecha v'nashuva chadesh yamenu kikedem. This is the duality of Eicha. This is the duality that Netivot Shalom was speaking about. And we're going to try to elaborate on these points. Tisha B'av is a day that we don't eat. As they say in the yeshivas, Yom Kippur is a day that who needs to eat? The Ruchnius is so powerful on Yom Kippur. Who needs to eat? Tisha B'av is the exact opposite. How could we eat? That's what they used to say in the yeshivas. And over here, the mourning in source number 2 expresses this idea that Tisha B'av reflects Gira Nasheh, the part of the animal that we don't eat. And he says in source number 2, the mourning, the Chernobyl Rebbe, who was the Talmud of the Maggid of Mezrich, V'yom Tisha B'av hu b'chinat Gira Nasheh. This day is expressed through the Gira Nasheh min koma shana. If every day has a limb, part of the body, interesting that it's based on a cow, but this day is the day of Gira Nasheh, the part of the meat, the part of the animal that we don't eat. That's where the klipot are. We know that this day is a day ready for Puranut. The first base of Mikdash was destroyed. The second base of Mikdash was destroyed. Beitar was captured. Ultimately, the Romans flattened Yerushalayim completely. As we also know, it's the day of the Meraglim. It's the day of the Sitra Achra. Even Esav, before Mashiach comes and before our third base of Mikdash will be rebuilt, and before we have a final redemption, there is still kochot of the Sitra Achra. And this is today. Ki Tisha B'av hu yom mufchar b'sitra achra. Liot lehem achiza yitera b'yom zeh shal ken yira bo ma she'ira. Also many other things, the Inquisition, the 1972 Munich Olympics. Horrible, horrible tragedies have happened. And if we can add our own, that right now we are once again at war. Hashem should protect Tzahal and all those that are fighting for Am Yisrael, all those that live their lives on the border. And Chas v'Shalom, nothing bad should happen, but once again, we're at war. Dafka Tisha B'av, because the Sitra Achra still exists. V'zeu makom rebizat Tisha B'av b'Torah pasuk ki al kein lo yachlu b'nei Yisrael et, that b'nei Yisrael do not eat the Gid HaNasheh et Rashi Tevot Tisha B'av. Aleph Taf is Rashi Tevot Tisha B'av. She'az lo yachlu b'nei Yisrael ela yitanu. This is the day to be fasting. Shelo yitnu koch al yidei achilatan l'sitra achra. That if we would eat this today, chas v'shalom, we would give the koch of that food would be going to the sitra achra, all the negative forces. And therefore, Chazal tell us, ha'ochel b'tisha b'av kilu ochel gid HaNasheh. It's as if we're eating gid HaNasheh. Shebemet hu b'chinat gid HaNasheh kamor. That eating today would be like eating the Gid HaNasheh, eating the part of the animal which is forbidden to us. And therefore, we leave it aside and we don't eat from it. I always try to think, when I want to understand an idea fully, I always try to think of a story in the Chumash or Tanakh, of something that expresses the Torah, the teaching that we're saying. And really there is, Be'emet there is, and I don't have to go far and wide to find this. It's something that we're all familiar with, but perhaps we didn't associate it with Tisha B'av. And that's the story of Yaakov, Avinu, and Yosef. Now, I'm going to be highlighting one specific part of the story. As we know, there's a lot of jealousy and hatred that went on in the house of Yaakov Avinu between Yosef and the brothers. And Yaakov hopes that by sending Yosef to go visit his brothers in Shechem, that there's going to be a potential for shalom, for peace. So he goes up there, and unfortunately, they see him, and they put him in the pit, and ultimately they sell him. Reuven tries to help out, unsuccessfully. If you're following along in the Chumash, it's Perek Lamed Zayin, Pasuk Kaftet. Reuven then comes back. Vayeshav Reuven el Abor. Reuven comes back to the pit. V'hine ein Yosef Abor. Yosef is no longer there. V'ikra et begadav. Reuven rips his clothes. And perhaps we during Tisha B'av should, at one time or another, feel like we need to rip our clothes. If we really feel Tisha B'av, that we should feel like we need to do Kriya. That we need to do Kriya as if someone has passed away right now. Reuben says, where am I going? The boy is gone, Yosef is gone. What do I have left? They stick Yosef's ketonet, his coat that he got from his father, and they dip it in blood. So, and here it is, they bring it to their father. We found the ketonet. Whose ketonet is this? Whose coat is this? Ve'kira, and Yaakov recognized it. Vayomer ketonet b'ni chaya ra'ah chalatu. It's my son's ketonet. An animal came, a bad animal came and ate my son. Torof toraf Yosef. Yosef has been devoured. Ve'kra Yaakov simlotav. Now Yaakov rips his clothes. Ve'esem sak b'motnav itabel al b'no yamim rabim. And he stays in mourning many days. Rashi says, how long was this? This was 22 years. 22 years Yaakov Avinu sat in mourning. Friends, this is one of our greatest prophets. Yaakov was a Navi. He lost Ruach HaKodesh. He lost divine prophecy for 22 years. Over the mourning over his son. And as we know, famously Rashi says, when someone passes away, there's avelut, and then there's nechama, and then there's consolation. But when there's avelut, but the person really hasn't passed away, there isn't consolation, there's no nechama. And Yaakov for 22 years did not achieve any nechama. And when we think about this, this is Tisha B'av. Because what was Yaakov Avinu crying about? Sinat chinam. He knew in his heart that there was hatred among his sons, and the hatred led to this matzav, to this reality. A reality of hopelessness, a reality of pain and suffering and sadness and mourning and tragedy. A reality of thinking about the most horrific things that a human being can think about that happened in the Shoah. And this is the experience that Yaakov Avinu has. But then comes along the end of the story, and we know there's many gilgulim. It takes a long time. It's a very long process before things work themselves out. But just to juxtapose these two things, in Parshat Vayigash, when Yosef sends the agalot to his father, and the agalot arrive, and initially Yaakov Avinu doesn't believe. Ki lo amin lahem, he didn't believe. I'm reading from Perek Memhei in Breshit Pasuk Kaf Zayin. וידברו אליו את כל דברי יוסף אשר דיבר אליהם וירא את הגלות אשר שלח יוסף לשאת אותו ותחי רוח יעקב אביהם. And Yaakov sees the agalot, famous Rashi, that Yaakov and Yosef were studying Egla Rufa, and he sees the agalot that Yosef, and this was the code that he understood that Yosef is still alive. And here we have v'tichi ruach Yaakov avihem, and the spirit of Yaakov, their father, was revived. Friends, I want to explain, this is what happens to us at Mincha on Tisha B'av. Our spirit is meant to be revived. Yes, we're not eating, but our spirit is now meant to be revived with the hope for the future. And just to sharpen the point, when Yaakov and Yosef meet, and Yaakov looks at the sons of Yosef in Perek Memchet, Pasuk Yud Aleph, Vayomer Yisrael Yosef, Ro panecha lo pilalti. Yaakov now recalls the whole story and says, for 22 years, I never thought I would see your face. V'hine ereh oti Elohim gam et zarecha. And now I get to also see your offspring. This is introducing, of course, Yaakov Avinu's brachot to Ephraim and Menashe at the beginning of Parshat Vayechi. Rashi says, Lo pilalti, lo malani libi lachshov machshava she'ereh panecha od. I never thought that I would see your face again. I never dreamed of it. Yaakov Avinu for 22 years stopped dreaming. And here we have Vatichi Ruach Yaakov Avihen, that his spirit was revived. His spirit came alive. And this is Tisha B'av from Mincha and onwards. And of course, the halachot of Tisha B'av change. And we sit up in chairs. And we put on tefillin and talit, reflecting our hope for the future. And I want to share with you some beautiful teachings in the Sichot Chazkut of Rav Tzvi Meyer in source number 3, if you're following along on the source sheets. Listen to the amazing thing that he says here. It wasn't until the moment the temple was destroyed that Am Yisrael actually started to do tshuva. Sheklal Yisrael lo emin she'achen yichrev beit Hashem. They didn't believe that it actually could happen. Not only that, Sharim matzanu ki afilo goyim lo eminu shetichrev Yerushalayim. Not even the goyim, not even the Babylonians, not even the Romans actually believed this was going to happen. This was the chosen people. This was the capital of the world. This was the Am Hashem, Am Skula. It's not in their hands to destroy the temple. No one believed it was going to happen. That someone would come to the gates of Yerushalayim. They didn't believe that it was going to happen, and therefore they weren't choser b'tshuva. But in the evening time, when they saw the temple burning, then they finally, as a nation, were choser b'tshuva. ואשר על כן כבר ברגע הראשון של חורבן ששבו בני ישראל השם יתברך בתשובה והתקרבות גדולה כבר היה בחינה של עושים רצונו של מקום. And the moment that we start doing tshuva, that we know we have to return to Hashem. We have to rid ourselves of the sinat chinam that we have inside of ourselves. At the moment that we start doing tshuva, we're doing the Ratzon Hashem. And therefore, dafka at this moment, the kruvim were facing each other and embracing each other because Am Yisrael bring closer b'tshuva. Yes, the temple was being destroyed and had to be destroyed. Yes, they didn't take advantage of doing tshuva when Yeshayahu and Yirmiyahu came to rebuke them for their chataim. But now, finally, Am Yisrael bring closer b'tshuva. And this is the moment of Mincha, when the Beit HaMikdash is being destroyed and we're being choser b'tshuva. And our tshuva is giving us hope. Continues the Rebbe in the next paragraph, Vashbot elu nishba'im u'ba'im b'Tisha B'av achar chatzot, Beit Preda, b'shat tfilat mincha achrona she'yemei bein hamitzarim. We have one more tefillah left in the 3 weeks. The 3 weeks of Avelut over the Beit HaMikdash. Says the Rebbe, Hakol holech achar hachitum. Everything goes after the end. Perhaps some of you have already davened mincha. I have not yet davened mincha. B'shat gemar v'siyum shel yimei bein hamitzarim yordima orot v'ashpaot shel kaf bet hayamim b'yoter tokef. The light of the 22 days that we just experienced, the Yemei Bein HaMitzarim comes down. Shetzadikim zuchtam agenu ufligu botam hazachiyah shechol Yehudi lasig b'kaf bet yamim elu. The potential a Jew has during these 22 days to ascend and connect and be choser b'tshuva and build the Beit HaMikdash through our tefillot, through our avat chinam, through loving every Jew, through loving every family member that we have. As the Magid of Mezrich teaches us on the pasuk, Kol Rodfei Sigua B'Bein HaMitzarim, the famous pasuk at the beginning of Eicha and Perek Aleph of Eicha, that anyone who chased Am Yisrael was able to catch them at this time of Tsar. Says the Magid of Mezrich on this pasuk, Kol Rodfei Sigua, anyone who seeks God during these 22 days, anyone who seeks God during these 22 hisigua can find Hashem, can connect. When the Melech is no longer in his palace and the Melech has been set out into the field, as we have without a Beit HaMikdash, Kol Rofei Hisigua B'Bein HaMitzarim. Anyone who seeks Hashem can can succeed and reach their goal. Specifically at the end of the time, with the last tefillot, our last chance, this Tisha B'av, our last chance, this Bein HaMetzarim, to daven for the Beit HaMikdash. As we're fasting, to have an opportunity, an expression of tzipita Yeshua, a yearning for Yeshua. And he finishes off, Minhag Yisrael Torah litpilel tfilat mincha, the Tisha B'av, the tfilat ha'ayin dimei bein hamitzarim. This is the 70th tefillah of this period. Mu'tafim b'talit v'tfilin. The men amongst us will be davening in talis and tefillin. Tadir no'agim b'talit v'tfilin rak b'tfilat shachri b'boker zman chesed. Usually we put on talis and tefillin in the morning. It's a zman of chesed. Ach zman mincha tadir hefech harachamim. But we know by Tisha B'av it's opposite. Masha'en ken b'tfila zo she'yordim v'ayim mashpa'ot shel siyum b'chotem Tisha B'av u'bein hamitzarim v'yored siyua shel b'chinat leidat Mashiach. During Mincha time, we experience an outpouring of chesed. The chesed of Hashem never ends. The rachamim, Hashem's love for us never ends. And that's reflected in the fact that we wear talis and tefillin at Tisha B'av. We have hope. We have a kesher with the Borei Olam, with Kuchabrichu. And that's expressed at Mincha on Tisha B'av. In the morning, we're still broken. We're in Avelut. We're in Onen. There's no talis and there's no tefillin. There's no hope. There's being broken over the fact that our Beis HaMikdash isn't here, and that we've experienced the most horrible tragedies that a human being can experience in a lifetime. But by Mincha time, after Chatzot, we're already sitting in chairs. Our hope and our faith and our bitachon has been reinstated and strengthened. So we saw here we have a duality of two aspects of Tisha B'av. We have the tragedy, the pain, the suffering, and then the hope, the tzipita Yeshua, the hope for the future. And I want to say in the deepest way that our hope at this point, at this hour, comes from the fact that we are sitting lowly on the ground. And when we emerge from that state of crying and brokenness, it's the most powerful thing. It can be the strongest inspiration during our lifetime. We can go out and change worlds. Number one, we have to connect to this. Number one, we have to know that right now, in the spiritual atmosphere, there's this energy of hope, of building, of tzipita Yeshua, which is just as important in our avelut as the crying and sadness and suffering. And we need to use this to build. I want to suggest to you something. Unfortunately, we know that there are many families that have been broken apart because of Yerusha, broken apart because of religious differences, broken apart for countless reasons. Maybe at a simcha, this one didn't mechabed this one didn't give a makava, this one didn't give sheva brachot, this one didn't give an aliyah, this one, who knows? I want us to think about that person that we don't talk to or that we're at odds with. And imagine right now if that person died. Yes, Tisha B'av in the morning, it is as if a dead person is lying in front of us. We sit on the ground crying as if it's Yom HaMitah, as if it is the day of death. I want us to imagine that that's what we experienced in the morning. That person in our family, that friend that we don't talk to anymore, they died. I want us to ask ourselves what we would think if we didn't have that opportunity to make peace, to make shalom. How tragic it would have been if Yosef Hatzadik would have died in Mitzrayim. And the family coming together would have been lost. Maybe we never would have had Am Yisrael. But the brothers were given an opportunity to make shalom, to bring their family together, to end the sinat chinam. And perhaps they felt their father's bitterness and they embarked on a path of tshuva. We have to end this. This is shtuyot. Over an aliyah, over an invitation, over a kavod, over $1,000, over. It's shtuyot. And now I want us to imagine that that person now is alive. And I want us to take the koach of Tisha B'av, the hope for the future, the tzipita liyeshua. And tzipita liyeshua doesn't mean the super duper hope that the third Beis Hamikdash is going to fall down from Shamayim. The tzipita liyeshua means right now get on the phone and calling that family member. Do you really hope for better times? Do you really hope that we can live in a better world where there's achdut and people care about each other and people put their egos on the side? Well, we can do that right now. Yosef is still alive. That family member, that cousin, that aunt, that uncle that we haven't talked to in 20 years, they're still alive. We can do what we can to make strides for Ahavat Chinam, to bring people together. And that is a fulfillment of Tzipita Liyeshua. The Sefer Kuzari finishes in the most remarkable way, as we all know, but I think it's fitting to recall the Sefer Kuzari on Tisha B'av. The Kuzarian king asks the rabbi in source number 4, why should we go to Yerushalayim, to Eretz Canaan, right? 1,000 years ago, during the time of Rav Yehuda Halevi, or before that, if Yehuda Halevi is discussing a period that happened hundreds of years before he lived, either way, Yerushalayim and Eretz Yisrael was desolate of Jews. The Shekhinah is not there. מושגת בכל מקום בלב התור וכסף חזק. ולמה נכניס עצמנו בסכנת המדברות וימים? Why do we have to go to Eretz Yisrael? There's a danger, there's a sakana. The Shekhinah can be found everywhere. Why should we go to Eretz Yisrael? The Kuzari king is asking, why do we need Tzipita Liyeshua? Why do we need to hope for the future? Why do we need to make little acts? Few steps. What does it matter? There's Galus. There's no Beis Hamikdash. We still live with tragedies and horrible things that are happening. Why do we need Tzipita Liyeshua? And comes along the chaver, the rabbi, at the end of the Sefer, explaining why he's going to go to Eretz Yisrael. In section Bet, in source number 4, Ba'arat b'nei Adam b'torut shel hamakom hakadosh yemeher inyan Hamiyuchal schar gadol ugmul rav. That when we arouse ourselves out of love for Hashem, then the matter is going to come. Things are going to happen. Schar gadol ugmul rav. A great schar, a great reward. Hashem, have mercy on us. Have mercy on Tzion. It's a time for graciousness and mercy. Because the time is, the appointed time is coming. When God's servants yearn for the stones of Eretz Israel. When we yearn for the afra, the dust of Eretz Israel. Yerushalayim will be built with the utmost yearning until Hashem has mercy on all the stones and the dust. And what Rabbi Yehuda Levi is teaching us, aside from this deep ratzon to come to Eretz Israel and make aliyah, that it's all about the yearning. It's all about the ratzon. It's all about taking the energy that we have and using it to build. And yet it might not seem so important. It might not seem so grand. It might not seem like, who am I? What am I worth? What's this one little mitzvah, this one little chesed, this one little attempt to connect, to bring people together, to bring myself together with a person? It does matter. That Hashem is waiting for us a little more yearning, a little more tzipita liyeshua, a little more regard, a little more leiv, as opposed to falling into galut, sinking, and never getting out. Hashem is expecting us at this moment, on this day, at this hour, V'techi Yaakov Avien, to get ourselves up, to revive ourselves, to give ourselves hope for the future. It can be a bright one if we want it to be. It can be a better one if we partner with Hashem to make it that. And that's the power of this moment. It's an experience that we don't experience the entire year. Tisha B'av in the afternoon is something we don't get to experience the entire year. And to put it all together, the Avodat Yisrael, the Koznitzer Rebbe in source number 5, the Ikar Inyan Litchazek V'la'ametz et Lubavo B'itim Alalu V'iti Pol B'reshet Yitrashlut B'Avodat Hashem Chalila. That of course on Tisha B'av is not a time to be depressed and despondent and not to fall in the Mara Shchora of negativity. Even though Tisha B'av is a dark day, is the darkest of days of the year, the day of Gira Nashed, that we don't eat the Gira Nashed, that we don't eat at all this day, because it's the day of Sitra Achra. And that even though we have to cry about all the things that have happened on this day, we have to, in our inner hearts, we have to rejoice about the future simcha that's going to happen. Shebo yulad Menachem, v'yigalenu b'mhera v'yismach Hashem b'maasav v'ayta lo amlucha k'mei kedem. That ultimately today is the day that Mashiach is born. Today is the day that one day is going to be a moed. It's going to be a day of celebration. It's going to be a day of Geula Shlema. And all the Khorban and the Inquisitions and the Crusades and the Holocausts are going to be forgotten. And yes, we have an opportunity, a slight opportunity to feel that simcha latid lavo. but it requires us to make that step forward. It requires us to chaparayim and take advantage of this precious time when we're going to be davening mincha, when we're going to be putting on talis and tefillin, to step forward and partner with Hashem and do what we can to get on the phone and make that phone call to the family member, to pick one mitzvah that we can do, that we can work on. Perhaps each one of us can make one little step forward in contributing something to our community that we weren't able to do last year. Because last year we said, what koach do I have? What strength do I have? Maybe we can do one more thing to show Hashem, mitzapim liyeshua. Hashem, we yearn for your Yeshua. Yes, we're patient. Yes, we have emunah shlema, b'viat HaMashiach. But each one of us can do something small as a sign of tzipita liyeshua. Hashem should bless us that this should be our last Tisha B'av. This should be the last time that we have to talk about psukim of Eicha and mention anything tragic and filled with sorrow. And the next Tisha B'av, this year should be much, much different. That all families, brothers and sisters, lost and found, should come together. Yaakov Avinu should have much nachas from all of his children coming together with the gula shlema b'meher b'yameinu. Amen.
Amen. Chazak u'baruch.
Amen.
Shkoyach.